Hello and welcome back for another VMK in the C++ series. In this VMK I'm going to be discussing file handling, basically how to load data from a file and how to save data back to a file. File handling is actually one of the more common features that people ask me on how to do in C++. It's not really that difficult so long as you understand the basics of how file handling works. So that's what I'm going to be covering in this video. Let's go into Visual Studio and create a new project. It's going to be a Windows 32 console project, and we'll call it File Handle. Under Application Settings, we have Console Application selected. Okay, so here's our main entry point into our program. Before I begin with the actual code, I should mention there's a number of ways of doing file handling in C++. This is just one technique that I'm going to show you here. There's many other ways of doing it, and some have their own advantages and disadvantages. So there really isn't a correct and an incorrect way of doing it. As long as you understand what you're doing and you can handle everything perfectly fine, use whatever technique you're most familiar with. If you take a look at the game development series, you'll notice that I think I demonstrate 2 or 3 different ways of handling files, and I do that specifically just so that you can become a little bit more familiar with different ways that the same thing can be done. When you're looking at third-party libraries from other people, you'll notice that they'll achieve the same sort of functionality different ways. So I want you to be able to recognize when a user does something a different way so that you can understand it and use it yourself if you need to. File handling, the way I'm going to demonstrate to do this is by using the file pointer structure. We're going to create a file pointer, and I call it FP just because that's commonly what it's called. And FP, you need to open up a file, and the way you do that is you specify fopen. F is prefixed to represent file, and the parameters you pass in here, there's 2. The first parameter is the name of the file you want to open, and the second parameter is the way in which you want to open this file. You have 2 options here. You can open it either as a text file, like an ASCII file that you can read, or you can open it as a binary file, in which case you better understand the structure of that file, because if you don't, you're going to have troubles reading it in. Well, as a matter of fact, if you don't understand the structure of the file you're trying to load in anyway, you're going to have problems. So no matter what, you try to understand fully what you're trying to load in before you even try to load it in. So let's type in here the name of the file we want to open, and I'll just call it file.txt. And second parameter here, we're going to type in RT. The R represents that we're going to be reading in the file, and T represents that we're going to be using the text file format. If we wanted to use binary file format, you'd use RB. But I'm just going to demonstrate RT for now. After you call fopen, you should always check to make sure that the file pointer exists. If it doesn't, then you know that something went wrong, so you shouldn't continue on any further. So we'll print here, printf file.txt not found. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to return 0 and quit the program. Otherwise, what we're going to do here is we're going to say printf file was open. After you open a file, you always have to close it or else you'll have a memory leak. And the way you close it is, again, you call fclose, file pointer is the parameter you pass in there, and then you're done. So let's save this, press Ctrl F5, and build it and run it. Notice that when you run the program, it says file.txt not found. Press any key to continue. So right now, because I just created a fresh project, this file.txt doesn't exist. Well, let's go and create it so that we can open it up and play around a little bit. So here I am inside my Visual Studio Projects file handle directory, and if you go into the debug folder, you'll see, okay, here's where my filehandle.exe program is. So you would think that you would go in here and create a new file.txt file. Now if I go and run my program, notice that file.txt not found. What's wrong? If you take a look, you see, well, file.txt is here. Here's my program. Why can't it find it? Well, let's try something else. If I open up a DOS window and go into the directory, into the debug directory, you can see here we have file.txt and we have filehandle.exe. If I type in here filehandle.exe and run the program, file.txt was open. The program is actually working fine. The problem that you're having when you're running your program from in here is that it cannot find the file.txt file because it's not in the current directory where your program is running from. To change to the directory where your program is sitting, you have to go into the project settings, file handle properties, and under debugging, there's a parameter here called working directory. So in here, you should specify the directory in which you're running under. And under the General tab, you'll see that your output directory is into the debug folder. And as a matter of fact, if you look inside of the linker, you see that the output directory / filename.exe is where the actual output is being placed. So let's just take this and under debug, place this under the working folder. Now if you go and run your program, you'll notice that file.txt was found. So everything is set up correctly now so that you can run it from Visual Studio or you could run it from your DOS prompt. It doesn't matter where you do it from. But I'll just stick with Visual Studio. So I just wanted to show you where to place this file.txt so that it is found. Okay, now that we can open up a file, let's put some data inside of the file so that we can load it into our program. We'll go back inside of our directory here and let's open this guy up. And currently it's blank because we just created it from scratch. And in here, let's just type in, I don't know, maticnose.com. Save this, and let's go back into Visual Studio. We know that there's something inside of the file, and it's just a string of text. So what you can do to read a string of text in is you can call the function fread. The first parameter you need to specify in here is the variable that you're going to be storing all the data that you're going to be reading. So before we actually do this, let's go and create that variable. It's going to be a character string, so char sz data, and I'm just going to allocate 100 characters to this data. So in here we need to specify the first parameter is where we're going to be storing all the data. Second parameter is what kind of data type are we going to be storing in here, and we're going to be using size of char. The next parameter is what is the maximum size of this data type here that we're going to be using to store stuff in, and we know it's size 100. And the last parameter is the file pointer that we're going to be reading from. And if you want more details on this, you can just go into MSDN, and here's the actual description of fread. So have a read through here to see exactly how this is working. And actually there's a demo program down here as well. So this should go in and read whatever string we have inside of the file and put it inside of sced data. We want to display that to the screen, so we'll call printf %s, do a couple carriage returns, and then sced data. Let's give this a run, and notice what happens. We have file text was opened, and then Matic knows displayed to the screen, and then we have all this garbage, and then finally we have press any key to continue. Now, the reason why we're getting all this garbage is because our string was not null terminated. We've just read in all the data that was stored inside of the file, but the actual file did not null terminate our strings. So to get around this, what you could do is initially you could initialize your array to be 0. So by doing this, you're going to set all the 100 elements inside of this string to be 0. And now when you run the program, you'll notice that www.maticnose.com displays the screen just fine. Another way to do the exact same thing is to use memset. And then you pass in your parameters that you want to clear. And again, you can just look at MSDN on how memset works if you like. Let's put some more text inside of this file here. Let's say my long string of text is here. And let's save this guy, and we'll call this guy again, and then we'll display everything to the screen. Notice what happens. The string of text that gets displayed to the screen gets displayed twice. What is going on here? Well, when I'm doing the fread function call here, I'm actually reading in 100 characters of string. So what is really happening is I'm starting here and I'm reading all of this in, and then I read in the carriage return, and then I continue reading. And then I keep reading until I get through all 100 characters. All of that gets saved inside of ascii data. I print it to the screen. Then I go in and read the data again. So once again, I display the exact same stuff to the screen. But that's not really what you want. What you would want is to be able to individually read one line of text from this file at a time, so that you could say, okay, this will go into string number 1, this will go into string number 2, and so on. And actually, if I go in here and clear up one other thing here, let's do memset ascii data. We're going to set all of the data inside of this array to be 0, and the size of this array is 100, so we're going to specify that. So the first time through, we're going to load in the data that we have from the text file into our variable. We're going to clear the variable and then load in some more data. Let me show you what's really happening behind the scenes. Notice that the data gets loaded to the screen, and you think that this is the second set of data that gets loaded in, but that's not true, because if I go in here and actually comment this out, notice that the exact same thing appears on the screen. So what's really happening is the first time through, you're reading in up to 100 characters from our text file, which is everything, and then after that there's no more data to be read, so the second time through in here nothing is actually read in. And then we just close our file. So our file reading is not really behaving the way we want to. Instead of using fread, there's another function that you can use, which is a little bit more handy for reading in lines of text from a text file, and that's called fgetS. The first parameter you pass in here is the same thing we used before, ascii data. Second parameter here is the maximum number of characters that we want to fill in, and that's 100. And the last parameter is our file pointer. Let's go and replace this here as well. Now look what happens. We have www.maticnose.com displayed to the screen. Then we have a blank line of text, and then we have my long string of text is here, and then another blank line. Now what's happening is we're actually reading in only one line of code per call. And as a matter of fact, let's put some breakpoints in here just to make this a little bit more clear. So right now, we've opened up the file, and then if I step into here, I've read in some data, and we can see that our data here, ascii data, now contains maticnose.com, and I display that to the screen. Notice that the very last parameter that we've read in is number 10. And if you look at the ASCII table, number 10 is actually a carriage return, which means that we're going to go to the next line. So this parameter here tells me that I'm supposed to display www.maticnose.com and a carriage return. And then I specify, do another carriage return. So that's why we're getting an actual blank line of text. Then I'm going to clear my string, so everything's 0. We're going to get some more strings, so that's the second line of text here where we have all this other stuff with a carriage return at the end. And then we're done. So that's what's happening now with this new function fgetS. If I remove these extra carriage returns here, you'll notice that our string of text is actually bunched together. Actually, let me remove this because this is starting to get a little confusing. Okay, now a lot of times you want to read in data that's not just string text. Instead, you'll want to read in some numbers or things like that. The way you can do that is, well, let me first put some numbers in here. Well, I'll leave this here just to demonstrate that everything's working properly. And let's type in some numbers in here. Let's do an integer, let's do a floating point number, and let's do a negative, something like that. Let's save this and go back into our code. We know that the first line of text is going to be string, so we can allocate some memory, read in that string, and print it to the screen. And then the second thing that we're going to be loading in is numbers. We actually have 3 numbers there. So we need to allocate some memory here to store those numbers. We had, what was it again? An integer, a floating point, and an integer. So we're going to create an integer, a floating point number, and another integer. Okay, instead of using fgetS when you're reading in numbers, you should use fscanf. The first parameter is your file pointer. The second parameter is the structure of the numbers that you're going to be reading in. We know that we're going to be reading in an integer followed by a floating point number followed by an integer. So we type in %d, %f, %d, and then the 3 parameters that you pass into here are the addresses of where you want to place all the values that you're reading in. So we're putting in the addresses of IA, FB, and finally IC. After making this call, you'll have your values from the file saved in these variables. So then we can display them to the screen by using printf. And I'll just steal this code here. And let's put a carriage return after that. And let's run that. So you notice that we have maticnose.com 12 3.14 minus 8 and then maticnose.com a second time. Oh, because I displayed it down here. Let's try that again. All right, 12 3.14 and then minus 8. So I'm able to read in those values from our file. Now, if for whatever reason I accidentally changed this to be 9, and let's save this and run it again. You notice that the 9 gets read in as a floating point number just fine. But if you change one of the integers to a floating point number and try to read this in, notice that the program gets confused. We have 1.2, 9, and 0.8, and what happened was it thought that the 1 was the integer, the 0.2 was the floating point number, and then the following 9 is the integer. So that's the way it interpreted. So you have to be careful that the format of your numbers is the same format that you've specified in here. If you mix them up, the compiler may mix up your numbers when it's reading the file in. Now, when you're writing data to a file, it's a lot easier than reading because writing doesn't really require you to have preconceived notion of how the file is formatted. With writing, you just dump it out any way you like. To start off, you have to create a file pointer. So you call file pointer equals fopen. You need to specify the name of the file you'd like to create. So let's call it output.txt. And the second parameter here is the type that you'd like to save this data as. We're going to be writing it instead of reading it, and we're going to be saving it as text file. So we're going to type in T here. Again, you should check to make sure that your file pointer is valid. If it's not, then you've got a problem. So we're just going to return 0. But if we've opened it successfully, then we can go in and save data to this file. At the end, we'll need to call fclose, so we'll do that right now before I forget. When you're saving stuff to a file, it's very easy. You just use fprintf. First parameter is your file pointer, and then your second parameter is basically the same thing that printf uses. So you could do %d and pass all of this stuff out if you like. Or you could even do fprintf, file pointer, type in your regular text to string here. My string, and let's add a carriage return to the end there. And the other thing you can do is instead of calling fprintf, you can also call fwrite. That's the equivalent of calling fread whenever you're reading data in. And with this guy, you have the first parameter is your data type that you want to print out. Let's take this guy here as an example. And the second parameter here is what kind of type of data is this. So we know it's of type char. And you need to specify how much data is in here. So we can just type in str length sz data. So that's going to return to us the length of this data string. And the last parameter is our file pointer. So let's compile and run this. And you see we've read in some data, we displayed it to the screen. And if we go into our folder, you notice that now we have an output.txt file. And if we open it up, we see we have our numbers that we've loaded in and displayed it, our string, and then our string that was stored inside of our sz data parameter up here. So there you go. Reading and writing data from a file and to a file using a number of different techniques, all to do with this file pointer structure. If you have any specific questions on loading or saving files, you can go to the website under the forum section. I'll add here a C++ VMK number 11 where it's going to contain all the file handling questions and answers that other people may have.